All right. Relax, everybody. Despite all the non-existent rumors to the contrary, I am not dead. I am still alive. It's been, I think, a little over a week, but regardless, here we are back at the Quick Carbon Podcast, now episode, I think, 30. I'm not sure. But thank you to everyone who donated or signed on to Patreon and supported me through the past month. If anyone new wants to, or anyone wants to support everything again, then PayPal and Patreon links are both in the description below and in the pinned comment at the top of the comments section. Now, running down the data we have for today. Weekly update numbers. U.S. oil production continues to fall, despite emerging claims to the contrary. U.S. oil production dropping over the past week from 11.4 down to 11.2 million barrels per day. This being the ongoing end result of the continued rig count loss over the past several months, the effects of which some people in the shale industry are now proclaiming that they're supposedly going to reverse entirely over the course of this month and the next. They're going to bring it all the way back up to 13. So I'll give you a little bit of a hint there. They ain't. They may stop the decline before it actually gets down to 10, which is where it was expected to go down to, but they ain't going to drag it all the way back up to 13 by the end of July. U.S. oil consumption came in a bit lower than previously at 15 million barrels per day this week. Individual numbers within that being gasoline consumption continuing to climb back up towards normal, now coming in at 7.5 million barrels per day. U.S. normal numbers are between 9 and 10. Diesel fuel consumption dropped a little bit, down to 2.7. Jet fuel consumption dropped way back down to 385,000 barrels per day. Normally for the U.S., it's anywhere between 1.6 and 2 million. And propane consumption only coming in at 589,000 barrels per day equivalent. U.S. crude oil inventories decreased this week by a bit over 2 million barrels. And global jet fuel consumption continues climbing as numerous nations are beginning to reopen travel. A lot of the European Union nations are either forming travel sort of groups or bubbles with the other nations that have basically eradicated the virus. For example, the Baltic states, Austria, Switzerland, Slovakia and Slovenia. Australia and New Zealand, everybody already knows, have reopened basically everything within themselves. And at some point soon, I forgot when, but they're about to start reopening travel between each other. And most of the East Asian nations are basically back up and intermingling again. So global jet fuel consumption, while it would normally be up over 6 million barrels per day by this time of the year, it had fallen down to a low point of 1.7. As of this week, it is back up to 3.3. And oil prices have made it up to just under $38 per barrel. In regards to the weekly natural gas numbers, U.S. natural gas production climbed back up from last week a little bit, from 100.1 up to 100.7 billion cubic feet per day, and U.S. natural gas consumption continues climbing as the summer heat sets in, so air conditioning demand is going up, which is driving up electricity demand, obviously, which drives up natural gas consumption by natural gas-fired power plants because those are the easiest ones to dial up on a moment's notice. So U.S. natural gas consumption this week came in at 79 billion cubic feet per day. Individual numbers within that being heating demand down to only 9.5. Power plant consumption up to 32.5. U.S. natural gas exports on LNG tankers dropping down to only 5.3. And consumption by the pipelines for its own pumping system fuel 6.1. U.S. natural gas storage inventories now up to 2.71 trillion cubic feet in storage, compared to normally this time of year they would still be down to 2.29, and last year, which was a very high demand winter, they were still down at 1.95. And natural gas prices are still holding relatively the same in the $1.80 range per thousand cubic feet. Regarding the rig count from last week, it had dropped U.S. rigs from 318 down to only 301, and I'm letting the specifics go this time since the new count is going to release today anyways, probably a few hours after you listen to this. Before going into the global data, just looking at the precious metals real quick. Global gold inventories still climbing because gold demand is down. as its primary demand consumer is still jewelry, as opposed to silver, which its primary demand consumer is now industry, electronics, and solar panels and such. Gold is needed in electronics, but that demand of it is a lot less than its jewelry demand. And obviously, over the last several months, because of everything that's been going on, jewelry demand has been pretty down. So gold inventories are still going up, and global gold inventories are now up to almost 29 million ounces in storage. Gold prices are currently just above $1,700 per ounce. Silver inventories had begun reversing and climbing back up a little bit, and had gotten up towards 314 million ounces in storage, but then they began falling back down again a couple days ago, and now they're back down to 313. And silver prices are just under $18 per ounce. Global platinum inventories went back up a bit, up to 159,000 ounces in storage, while platinum prices are currently at around $859 per ounce, and palladium inventories are still at about 49,000 ounces in storage, with palladium prices being in the 1930s. And the global oil production data for the various countries, at least those that released their data and have meaningful production numbers. Azerbaijan continuing on its gradual terminal decline, now down to 758,000 barrels per day. And the global numbers, they're not as current as the OPEC monthly production numbers. The OPEC numbers are literally for the previous month. The rest of the global numbers, they're usually a few months back. So these won't be showing any of the production cuts yet for the few non-OPEC members that announced that they were going to cut. The OPEC numbers will, however, once those release next week, if they're on time at least. Argentina still holding on roughly in the same range. They came in at 516,000 barrels per day. Australia had made it up to over 400,000 barrels per day again, but over the past few months they've been dropping and are back down to only 322,000. And Brazil had broken 3 million and had gotten up to 3.2 million almost, but now they took a sudden drop down to 2.97. Canada had gotten up to 4.65, but then fell down back into the 4.5 region. This round coming in specifically at 4.55. Cameroon, over in Central Africa, dropping a little bit, now down to 68,000 barrels per day. Colombia, over in South America, still wobbling around in the upper 800s, this month coming in at 878,000 barrels per day. Egypt had fallen back under 600,000 barrels per day, now down to 578, and their domestic consumption is now usually between 800 and 900,000 barrels per day. Chad, in the interior African region, has been dropping as well, dropping from their plateau of 132 down to 128, now down to 121,000 barrels per day. China still continuing to cling to that 3.7 to 3.9 region, this time coming in at 3.86 million barrels per day. Though obviously well short of their domestic consumption levels, which are heading towards 15 million. Equatorial Guinea continuing its terminal decline, now down to 156,000 barrels per day. Ghana in West Africa continuing to decline a little bit every few months after getting up to a new plateau of 214. They dropped down to 208, and now they've dropped down to 206,000 barrels per day. India had been on a very steady textbook terminal decline slope. However, over this last little bit of time, they started getting a bit more wobbly and have been fluctuating between 600 and 650,000 barrels per day. This time in particular, dropping down to 618. And their domestic production obviously being far short of their domestic consumption, which is now at around 5 million barrels per day. Indonesia continuing to hold off their terminal decline and fluctuate around in the lower 700s, this time coming in at 730,000 barrels per day exactly. Kazakhstan recovering a bit, now back up to 1.98 million barrels per day. Malaysia, as usual, continues wobbling around in the lower 600s, this time coming in at 606,000 barrels per day. Mexico continues recovering production after their terminal decline had dropped them down to almost 1.6. They've climbed back up by a little bit more this time, back up to 1.76 million barrels per day. Still short, however, of their domestic oil consumption levels, which are around 1.9. Oman, after holding its plateau at around 970,000 barrels per day for a long time, has begun dropping a few thousand each month, this time coming down to 955,000. Papua New Guinea, a relatively small producer who had been holding at a bit above 50,000 barrels per day of production for a while, has begun its decline and has been dropping by exactly 1,000 barrels per day each month. 51 down to 50, down to 49, and now down to 48,000 barrels per day. Qatar, over in the Persian Gulf, is still holding their plateau at 1.53, much higher than the roughly 600 or 700,000 they had been holding a plateau at for a very long time. So they're now going to be burning through their reserves much faster than we had initially calculated in that video we did a while back about when each OPEC member would lose their ability to maintain their plateaus. If anyone hasn't seen it and wants to, I'll put a link to that in the corner of the video, and I guess I'll put a link to that in like the description or something too. Russia, before cutting, was still in its regular area, holding at 10.88 million barrels per day. South Sudan, still holding a plateau of about 180,000, while Northern Sudan had dropped to 65,000 barrels per day. Trinidad and Tobago, island nation off the coast of Venezuela, continues losing production at 1,000 barrels per day each month as it continues on its terminal decline, now down to only 56,000 barrels per day, and less than 10,000 above its domestic consumption level, which is about 47,000 barrels per day. Turkmenistan, holding a plateau at around 190,000 barrels per day. In the past, a few years back, they had been closer to 300,000, but they've been in decline since then, down through the 200s, and most recently down to 190. The UK wobbles around the most out of many of these nations, fluctuating wildly all over the place from month to month, anywhere between 800,000 and 1.1 million. So the UK is the most indecisive country on earth. This time they came in at 1.07 million barrels per day. Thailand continues fluctuating on its wobbly plateau in the lower 200,000s, this time 222,000 barrels per day. And Vietnam has been on its very slow terminal decline. It actually dipped under 200,000 a couple of months back, but this time it's back at 207,000 barrels per day. While its domestic consumption levels recently last year had just passed up over 500,000 barrels per day for the first time. But yeah, if anyone wants to see that OPEC plateau end calculation video, then I'll put a link to that. But otherwise, that's that for this episode. So thanks everybody for sticking around and listening. Like the video, subscribe if you haven't already, blah, blah, blah. Subscribe to my other channel too with all of my, travel adventure stuff from back when I was able to travel. And if you want to support the channels and the podcast or just help me out, IRL, PayPal and Patreon links are down in the description below in the pinned comment also. So that's the end of that. May God bless you all, and I will see you all around next time.